This is the Sports Bash Warm-Up with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN. Now, live inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, here's Josh Hennig.
And every time something like this happens, every time a new letter comes out from the other side, every time there are negotiations that go sideways like this has, the answer seems to be no. And it's truly unfortunate because right now, Jim, there should be baseball. Like right now, they should be ramping up for the season, if not playing games. And instead, here we are wondering if Monday MLB is going to answer this by saying, we're going to shut things down and have a grievance.
Boy, this baseball weekend is going nuts. Don't even mention the fact that we got to talk about that 30 for 30 last night. McGuire Sosa, long gone summer. Baseball saga continues. Josh Hennig here, and I'm here all for the drama. 97.3 ESPN. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. Begin on the conversation coming up at 125. 97.3 ESPN.com. Phillies insider Frank Klose will join us. Also the co-host of the Powder Blue podcast. Baseball is just out of control at this point. You know, over the weekend, on Saturday, Sports Bash Saturday, we talked about what's going on with the NBA. And I feel like the NBA still is on the path to coming back, despite everything that's going on and everything I've read and everything I've heard. But baseball is a totally different animal because baseball's problems just seem way deeper, way more complicated. And watching the 30 for 30 last night only amplifies what is going on with baseball. The long gone summer 30 for 30 last night, which I think should have been more than one part. I felt that they skipped some spots here and there, but we'll get into that in a little bit. The fact that baseball needed a home run chase only amplifies the reality of how messed up baseball is in terms of how they're viewed by the general public, how they're viewed internally, and how the players and the owners look at each other. Over the weekend, Major League Baseball Players Association told the league, we need, by the close of business today, to be told what's going on. We're done negotiating. We're done talking. When I saw this come down the line, I read the press release Saturday night. All I could think of was these sides are literally just throwing tomatoes at each other. They're literally just saying, I don't like you, and I'm going to throw shade at you. Because then Major League Baseball's response is, well, we were hoping that you would negotiate in good faith. And it just feels like we're trending towards what happened with baseball in 94. Not in terms of a lockout or a strike, but in terms of there feels like we could be trending toward what baseball used to be viewed as. And I'm glad I'm not the only one who thinks this because Jeff Passan said the same thing on ESPN radio.
This is going to make 1994... No, you know what? I'm not going to go that far yet. We're still too early to say that. And I don't want to be a prisoner of the moment. And look, back in 1994, I was 14 years old.
Listen, we're all thinking it. And Passan said it. We're all thinking, oh no, 94. And then watching the documentary last night, I'm thinking of why 98 was so important. And I'm thinking about how it took two sluggers, one of them no one expected, and the other one with a great amount of anticipation to bring baseball back into the good feelings of the public. And then a few years later, the witch hunt that was the steroid trials and investigations and who said this and who did that and who really was this and that. And then guys having to come out and apologize. I mean, it's been an absolute mess for baseball. And now we're at a point where baseball still can't get out of its way 22 years later. And if you include 94, it's 26 years later. And when a good chunk of us were younger, whether we were in junior high or high school or college, we all remember what it was like in the 90s. Baseball felt like it was just rolling, and then 94 was like taking a baseball bat to the groin. And whether you were a big-time baseball fan or not, it felt like for at least a few years, the majority of the public didn't care. Now, in recent years, people don't care about baseball because of the play of the game. So this whole situation with baseball not being able to get along only amplifies that. But now as we sit here, we realize that baseball is their own worst enemy. We realize now, looking back on 98, has really anything changed? The two sides still can't get along. The two sides still look at each other with this, for lack of a better term, hatred. And now, as Jeff Passan reports of ESPN, we're probably just going to be going to arbitration in the end.
And where this is going to wind up, Hannah, whether it is the players doing it, whether it is the league doing it, in all likelihood, both of them doing it, is in a grievance room where an arbitrator is going to decide what exactly this document says and who exactly was at fault.
Because at the end of the day, neither side wants to admit fault. At the end of the day, we need an independent person to sit the two bickering sides. These supposed adults, mommy and daddy, are fighting and they can't get along. We need an arbitrator to sit them down for couples counseling, basically, when it comes to baseball, and get over themselves. And the problem isn't that either side is right or wrong. Because frankly, if you break it down to the fundamental level, both sides are right and both sides are wrong, honestly. It's not that there's a winner or a loser here. It's that neither side is willing to compromise. The players want to be sure that they get paid what they feel they're worth. And I totally get that. I'm all on board for someone being paid what they're worth. And let's be frank, the majority of people in the world are not paid for what they're worth, okay? It's just the nature of the world we live in. There's a lot of people who are overpaid. There's a lot of people who are underpaid. There's very few people who actually get paid what they're worth. So I understand the players trying to hold their ground on that. But to sit there and say that you are an exception to the rest of the world, the entire world is suffering because of this pandemic. The entire world have people without jobs, without work, and these players are acting like they shouldn't have to take a little bit of a pay cut on some level compared to everybody else. Now, the owners are wrong as well, though, because the owners are turning around and they're saying, we won't show you our books. We don't want to give you the information. We don't want to tell you what's going on. We don't want to explain to you why in 2019 we made almost $10 billion in revenue, but in 2020, we go from $10 billion to $3 billion. And obviously, I'm rounding off numbers. I know it's 2.76, but let's round off to just not get too much math. Let's be realistic. You, me, and the majority of us are pretty far removed from high school and college algebra and calculus. So we don't want to do too much math off the top of our heads. But just for the sake of argument here, let's break it down. If baseball is telling the players, we estimate about $3 billion is going to be available to pay you and everybody else. And last year, according to Forbes, you made about $10 billion. And Rob Manfred says that you're going to lose $4 billion because less games, no fan attendance, etc. What happened to the other $3 billion? Because the last time I checked, 3 plus 4 is 7, and 7 minus 10 is 3. So the baseball players are saying, wait a minute, this is some funky math. We want to know what's going on. And then the owners turn around and be like, we don't want to show you the books. Can't do that. Can't show you what's going on. I'm sorry. Neither side then is acting in good faith. The owners aren't acting in good faith. The players aren't acting in good faith. And as I'm watching Long Gone Summer, the 30 for 30 last night, I'm watching this home run chase, and I'm watching what happened, how the people were flocking. I mean, McGwire and Sosa became rock stars, and how July turned to August, and August turned to September, how it became such a greater and greater and greater fever pitch, and how Tony La Russa told the story about how McGwire, he basically had to convince McGwire to play the last game of the season because McGwire was so spent physically and mentally. He was just spent. And you look at the fact that McGwire the year before had 58. McGwire had already had multiple times where he hit 40 to 50 home runs. So the anticipation of him doing this was so high. And this was a Cardinals team that didn't even make the playoffs. They were a mediocre team. Literally all that team was a handful of sluggers and some really average pitchers. They didn't even make the playoffs. Sammy Sosa was the MVP, but people were so entrenched in, we've never seen this before. This is amazing. This is incredible. And baseball capitalized on it, as they should, because they're smart business people. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, what makes baseball great is when you take away all of the stupid adult stuff. It's a kid's game at heart. When you grow up, you go out in the yard and you throw the ball around and you play stickball when you're younger, and then you play little league and you play a little in junior high and high school, and you got the aluminum bats, the pinging the ball off the bat, and diving in the grass, diving in the dirt, running out of base hit. All these little things just bring us back to our youth. And McGwire hitting home runs was incredible because the majority of us can't hit a home run. Let's be realistic. Unless you were a prodigy or you were at one point a very good baseball player, which only a small part of the population even is, because only a small part of the population actually goes to college and plays baseball. The majority of us look at home runs and we see, wow, that's amazing. That's incredible. So watching McGwire and Sosa crush these home runs, and the idea that in 1961, Maris hit 61 home runs. The idea that we're seeing something that we've never even seen in our lifetime and wasn't even in color for most people when it happened on color television. They've had to change some of that film to color now. A lot of the TVs back then were black and white. So knowing all this stuff, it was incredible. It was amazing. And no matter what age you were, no matter what point you were with baseball, you just fell back in love with the game because of Cal Ripken's streak and because of the home runs in 98 and the crazy World Series between the Indians and the Marlins, because the Marlins were, who the heck were they? And then you look at the Yankees dynasty, and you look at 9/11, how baseball pulled us out of that. And then you get kicked in the gut because at the end of the day, adult stuff comes up again. And that's the problem with baseball. Every time we want to get excited about it, every time we start falling back in love, we get hit in the groin with a baseball bat. 609-403-0973 is the text board to keep on the conversation. 609-403-0973. Also watching 1998, I don't think we appreciate what McGwire and Sosa and Bonds and all these guys did. Because at the end of the day, in my humble opinion, hitting a baseball is one of the hardest things to do in all of athletics. There's a reason why you can be 50 and 60 years old and play golf, okay? You work at it long enough, you get all right at it, and you can have some fun with it. But you're not 50 and 60 hitting home runs. It's very rare. And let me tell you something. No matter where you stand on the PED issue, you can't tell me for 1 minute that if McGwire had not taken Andro, as they talked about a little bit in the documentary last night, you're telling me that McGwire would have hit, 20 less home runs? Hitting a baseball is one of the hardest things to do. The hand-eye coordination, the timing, the ability to make your mind hit that switch is absolutely incredible. Barry Bonds was a member of the 400-400 club before he ever juiced. Barry Bonds had 400 home runs, 400 stolen bases. And as it's been documented, he saw McGwire and Sosa and he said, "You want home runs? I'll give you home runs." And frankly, Bonds probably should have hit more home runs because when he hit 73 home runs, he was walked 177 times that season. The year McGwire hit 70, McGwire walked 15 less times. The next year, Bonds broke the record for walks in a season with 198. Intentionally walked 68 times. He only had 46 home runs. Frankly, Bonds probably could have hit more home runs. He wouldn't walk so much. Watching that documentary, all I think of is, man, Steve Traxel and Dustin Hermanson and Mike Morgan, these dudes are throwing golf balls up there, just lofting it over the middle of the plate. Either pitching was really bad in 1998, or McGwire is one of the greatest hitters of all time, which he's obviously not, because his batting average it's okay. And there were a lot of years that he was high in the number of strikeouts. So, frankly, you could make an argument that McGwire and Sosa were aided by the good feelings of 98 and the mediocre pitching, whereas Bonds got walked a ton of times and nobody liked him. How do we handle that? These are still great hitters. And people act like these guys using PEDs was the worst thing in the world. Let me tell you something. If it's not illegal, then who cares? As I get older, I become more and more indifferent to people working the system. We've been told since we were kids, whatever it takes to win at all costs. We get shoved with all this bravado and all this chutzpah and all this, you win, you play to win the game, right? That was Herm Edwards. And we're told all these things. And yet, when a guy actually goes out and does whatever it takes to win, we don't like him. Because he didn't do it the way we wanted him to. Because he didn't follow our personal rules of morals and etiquette. Get out of here. In the 90s, nobody was testing for this stuff. So you're going to get mad at 103 baseball players, only 3 of which that we fully know about, from that New York Times article, tested positive in a voluntary drug test in the 2000s. In the 90s, there were no drug tests. The only reason why we know about McGwire is because the Andro was in his locker. And frankly, a lot of you guys out there who are against PEDs, you probably don't even know the difference between Andro and creatine, because they talked about creatine on the broadcast last night. And while the broadcast, the 30 for 30 could have done a much better job at breaking it down, at the end of the day, we are letting something that wasn't illegal, something that is subjective in your opinion of what's good and what's bad, affect your opinion of something that was incredible to happen. All I know is that I've hit 1 home run in my entire life, and it was the inside the park home run. Because frankly, I was a gap-to-gap hitter at my best. And at my best, I was barely a starter in baseball. For McGwire and Sosa to combined for 136 home runs in 98 was amazing to me. And Griffey himself hit a bunch of home runs too. Griffey hit 56 back-to-back years. That's incredible. But if you're going to tell me that PEDs made these guys better hitters, there's no science behind it. Am I supposed to get on Craig Biggio because he was using creatine? He's in the Hall of Fame. Most people don't even know what creatine is. And the people who think they know what creatine is only because there's a dude at their gym or at the supplement store telling them what they think creatine is. Because let's be frank, half the people you talk to at the gym and at the supplement store, they're not registered dietitians or supplementation. They don't really know the science behind it. Please. All right, we got to get some text in here. 609-403-0973. A lot of text popping in. Had to get all that off my chest. Rob from Bayville chimes in, says, if Rob Manfred wants to be remembered as a leader and a custodian of the sport, I think it's time for him to start figuring out a way to build some trust between the players and the owners. Rob in Bayville goes on to say, baseball has a lot of bigger issues than just worrying about 80 versus 50 games. That's Rob from Bayville. You're right, Rob. And I think that part of the problem for Manfred is that Manfred is a guy who is trying to balance a lot of issues. And I don't know if he's doing his best, I think, but he's not doing a good enough job because Manfred understands that there's a delicate balance between the owners' wants and wishes, the players, but also the people who are spending money on baseball. People who are spending billions of dollars for television and advertising. There's a lot of variables that go into baseball making money. It is a business after all. And you're right. If Manfred wants to be remembered as a great leader and custodian of the game, he's got to figure out a way to bridge this gap. Because let's be realistic. Has baseball really had a admired, respected commissioner over the last decades? I mean, Selig was looked at like he was a bumbling fool half the time. I mean, what, Fay Vincent? I mean, that was the 80s. I mean, even Goodell on some of his speeches, at least he's trying. You just want Manfred to maybe try a little bit more. Abe chimes in at 609-403-0973, says, you're right, Josh. Give me steroids. I'm not hitting any home runs. You have to have talent. Put those guys in the hall. Abe, you and I are on the same page. At the end of the day, Bonds is incredible. Roger Clemens is incredible. And by the way, Roger Clemens had 2 different 20 strikeout games before he ever took anything. Before he ever got to Toronto and started doing what he was doing. Am I supposed to act like Roger Clemens didn't have talent? Listen, look at a guy like Brady Anderson. Brady Anderson had 1 season and 15 seconds on the 30 for 30 last night. He juiced once, never did well again. Okay, so maybe juicing gets you 1 good year. Doesn't make you a great all-time player. Nick from Brigantine chimes in, 609-403-0973. I don't get it, Josh. The owners own the company, and everyone else are employees. Guys need to get back to work. Casino dealers are making the casino their money and our hourly employees. 2/3 of our pay are tips. No one expects to split the profits. That's Nick from Brigantine. Well, the problem, Nick, is that there's a huge difference between baseball and the casinos, whereas baseball, people are tuning in to see the players. People aren't going to casinos because of the specific dealers. Unless you're a frequent casino goer and you like certain dealers and you know their schedule, which is kind of creepy when you think about it, then you're probably not going specifically for the dealer. People are tuning into baseball games to see Mike Trout. You watch the Lakers because LeBron is there. You didn't care about the Lakers when it was Shannon Brown playing out there. No, you want to watch it because it's Kobe and LeBron. You watch the Eagles because you love the Eagles, but you love the Eagles players. You don't love the Eagles uniforms per se. Some people hate the Eagles uniforms. Some people want them to go back to Kelly Green. So when you think about it, baseball is it's very different. Sports are very different. So, yes, the baseball players are employees, but they've negotiated because of their union and the collective bargaining agreement to function more as semi-partners in the operation. And the players want to get compensated because at the end of the day, if baseball is making billions of dollars and the players are only making a percentage off of that revenue, at what point do we have to admit that the players are the result and the purpose of the revenue? All right, I got a bunch more texts to get to. We will get to them. 609-403-0973. Coming up next, we'll get more into this with 97.3 ESPN.com Phillies insider Frank Klose, also the co-host of the Powder Blue podcast right here on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City.
You think you know me?
We'll get back to the text in just a bit, 609-403-0973. But joining us right now on the Boardwalk Hotline to get more into all the stuff that I'm yelling about and you guys are yelling at me or agreeing with me about at 609-403-0973. He is the co-host of the Powder Blue podcast, our 97.3 Phillies insider. Frank Klose joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Frank, how are you doing on this Monday?
I'm doing well. How are you, Josh?
I'm doing well. You know, I'm not baseball, so I don't have a lot of drama in my life right now. Listen, you know, we talked about this numerous times now, but it feels like, and I opened the show by saying this, it feels like every time baseball wants to give you something to feel warm and fuzzy about, they just take a baseball bat to your groin, Frank. And it feels like this weekend, the Players Association on Saturday and then the league basically are just throwing tomatoes and slander at each other. Because at some point, neither side wants to admit they're wrong, right?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think the development over the weekend that was the biggest problem was the fact that baseball just sort of shifted the same amount of money into a new way instead of offering anything more. So basically, you're at the point now where the players are like, well, if you're going to impose this season of 48 games at full prorated salaries and you're trying to get us to play 76 for the same amount of money, then the heck with this. And that's how you got that strong rebuke over the weekend where they basically said, all right, you're going to do what you're going to do. Just tell us when and where.
What do you think is going to happen next? Like, for example, Jeff Passan is suggesting that it's, eventually probably go to an arbitrator to basically settle some of this. Is baseball really just going to be like, look, this is what we're going to do. You're going to accept it? Or are we going to have to go to an arbitrator, like Passan says, for us to actually get some of this figured out? Because I know there's a lot of stuff that still has to be agreed upon.
Yeah, I think that's going to be problematic. What I think would be the best thing to happen is that, I'll put it this way: the Players Association said that they wanted a response by today in terms of the when and where, and if they don't get that, I think if baseball today basically did make a stance and say, all right, well, here's when we're starting and how, if they could throw some more of the players' way, I think that would go a long way. I really hope it doesn't go to a point where you're in some arbitration situation, because this will just drag on and on and on.
Frank, one of the biggest questions I have, and this is where I understand where the players are coming from, according to reports like Forbes and other sports media outlets, sports business media outlets, baseball made grossly $10 billion last year. And then Manfred said that baseball is supposed to lose $4 billion this year, but then baseball is saying that they're going to make about $3 billion. The last time I checked, Frank, 3 plus 4 equals 7 and not 10. So what happened to the other $3 billion?
Yeah, here's one of the arguments from the players. They feel like they don't know the true books. I was listening to Ryan LaVarnway, the veteran catcher. He was on MLB Network Radio over the weekend, and he basically said, from the players' perspective, like, we don't necessarily trust the books. Like, and he was basically saying, like, listen, open up the books, really show us what this money really is, because I think the players feel like they don't really know. And another thing that happened over the weekend was it sort of leaked out by Joel Sherman of the New York Post that there was a new baseball deal for broadcast rights of the playoffs, and $1.5 billion, I believe, is the number for them to air just some of the playoffs on TBS. And so when you see that deal, the players are like, listen, we don't even know what to believe anymore. That deal leaked out at exactly the right time for them to really kind of take that hard stance, because they don't feel like they're being given an honest assessment. Now, there are ways that you can look at how you do the books in a business. Maybe it's true that in any given year, at the end of the year, they might show a loss. But people who do do the books, there are things like depreciation that you can throw in there to show a loss that aren't necessarily a loss. And the numbers, if you look over from 1991 to I think it was 2017, baseball franchises appreciated in value about 10.7%. If you look at the numbers from Forbes. So, yeah, you might show a $30 million loss for one season, but if your franchise all of a sudden is worth $200 million more than last year, did you really lose money? So I think that's one of the arguments the players are making, and they feel like they haven't totally seen the books. There's a couple teams like the Atlanta Braves that are owned by a publicly traded company. You have some insight to their books, but the owners have not been very transparent. I mean, if you look at the Phillies, their ownership group is we know about the Buck family and John Middleton, and there's some limited partners. Because it's privately owned, we're not going to actually see their exact numbers. And I'm not saying that they're the Phillies in particular are misleading anybody, but the players, they want to see that. They want to see that, yeah, there is a real loss, and they don't feel like they got that.
Frank Klose joining us here on the Boardwalk on the hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you're following on Twitter at Frank Klose, r973ESPN.com, Phillies Insider, also co-host of the Powder Blue podcast. Speaking of the Phillies, Frank, one of the concerns that are out there right now is the fact that there's 20 states right now with fluctuating COVID-19 positive tests. We know that several Texans and Cowboy players have tested positive in football for COVID-19 now. How much of the whole health and safety issue is also a concern? Because it feels like with the players, they're all talking about money, Frank, but there's not enough talk about the actual safety of the people actually going out there and playing the sport.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. And it sounds like most of the negotiating, and there are a few different sources, the usual reliable people, right? The Bob Nightingales, Jeff Pastons. Players are more worried about the money at this point because they do recognize that there is a risk. I don't know if they're just scared about it, but they basically want to be compensated for the risk. And, when you look at that March 26th agreement that's off-cited about fans, no fans, well, resumption of play, according to definition, was that there would be no risk for your health, too. So that remains an issue. And let's face it, I know people in other industries, if they're retiring because, they could retire and they don't want to put themselves at a health risk. Or, teachers, for example. I know a retired professor who was just telling me that he was going to teach part-time in the fall. And in light of all this, he said, the part-time contract isn't worth it given the risk. And, you're at a point now you'd think it's a lot of money, but a lot of the players are like, 48 games. I don't know that that's worth the risk. So I think that they expect that if they're going to be kind of put at risk, that there should be compensation according to that. And they feel that the March 26th agreement does give them that ability to demand that they get the full prorated pay. And that's because of the risk that they're going to incur.
Frank, isn't also another issue that we know that there's some players, they're financially stable enough that they can get away with making these demands, while there's a whole slew of other players because of their lack of service time, because some of these guys just don't make Bryce Harper money, for example, that, this might be the only way that they actually get their break. So some of these guys, I feel like they're probably saying, hey, just let us go out there and play. It feels like for some of these guys, we've heard from a lot of the big names, Frank, but we don't hear as much from the guys who are making a tenth of what the big names are making.
Yes, I mean, let's just look at the Phillies roster for a second. I'll throw out a name, Austin Davis, right? The lefty reliever. He had a couple cups of coffee with the Phillies last year. The way things go, he might have a couple cups of coffee with the Phillies this year. And, somebody like him, he might earn a prorated amount of the major league minimum to begin with over a few seasons, and that might be all he ever does in his career. So for him, for all the time he's put in, all the years he's put in to get to this point, he's trying to basically maximize his entire earnings for his entire career before he probably has to go do something else and start over from scratch. So players like that definitely need to work. And it's like a lot of other industries. If you need to maximize your top years where you can earn. I heard somebody tell me once, like, well, yeah, when you're in your mid-30s to late 40s, that's when you should be out maximizing your earning potential, because that's when you're young and agile at doing so. Well, you think of the athlete, I mean, their prime years might only be like 24 to 27. A lot of people say, And imagine falling into that category right now where you're perhaps losing 1/3 of your opportunity. They want to get that in, and maybe you're willing to take more of a risk because, let's face it, if you work so hard to get to this point, you lose this opportunity, you really have nothing left for your family.
Frank, I want to touch on also last night's 30 for 30 long gone summer. First of all, this is a personal opinion. I enjoyed it, but I felt they could have put a lot more depth and substance into it. The reason I say that is because, one of the things that to me, Frank, that made 98 special is the fact that the majority of people can't hit, Frank. Let's be realistic. If any of us who've ever played baseball in our lives, any of us who think are great athletes, none of us are going out there and hitting 50, 60, 70 home runs. One of the things that made baseball amazing was that it's a spectacle to watch that happen, and that's why 98 was so special, because it was something that we've never seen before in our lifetimes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I will say for me, it did bring back a lot of memories. My family buried my uncle this week, and he had lived in Chicago during that time period. And I personally, when I was out there to visit him during 1998 season, I got to watch some of those home runs in person from Sammy Sosa. And I got to see what it was like to open the Chicago Tribune every day and the local news every day. And really, it kind of really ignited, if you think about the market size, St. Louis, Chicago, it ignited certainly a very major market in Chicago, another big market in St. Louis, but really around baseball, too. Back then, one thing they didn't really emphasize, I thought, was back then, of course, we had one ESPN, and ESPN was the only source. There was no MLB network yet, but every night, the cut-ins to follow, like this was something that everybody nationally could follow, and it came at a good time because after the 1994 strike, a lot of people had sworn off baseball, and it actually reminded me too of our current discussion, because if this labor situation leaves a sour taste in everybody's mouth of a casual fan, then what do you do to sort of propel baseball back? And now, one thing that the ESPN documentary did not dwell on too much was the steroid use, and it was acknowledged, of course, but for a lot of people that is sort of the main narrative of that chase now, looking back. But knowing that had a lot to do with it, perhaps. How do you reignite the game again in that kind of way? I just don't see how anything like that could possibly happen anytime soon.
Well, no, Frank, because at the end of the day, a game that is basically something we all played at some point when we were younger as kids, it's very fundamental in a lot of people's youth, was basically turned into an adult mess because there was no rules against using PEDs in the 90s. But yet people were acting like it was some great defilation of the moral code when don't we always tell people, hey, Frank, you play to win the game and you win at all costs, but now we're judging guys that they tried to win at all costs. I don't understand why it's okay for one person to do one thing. We got guys in the Hall of Fame with spitballs and all kinds of crazy stuff, but yet steroids is so different. I don't understand it, Frank.
Yeah, well, we've seen the sign stealing scandals over the last couple of years. That kind of became the next thing. I think that whenever there's an opportunity for someone to get an advantage, they're going to chase it. Now, when it came to the Houston Astros, the law was laid down at some point saying no more use of electronic devices, and I think that's why that ended up being a scandal the way it was and how it played out the way it was. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they didn't explicitly state that you couldn't use these particular substances. But one thing that did happen around 1991 was an argument that no illegal substances should be used. Now at the time they're probably referring to things like cocaine and not performance-enhancing drugs like steroids. But certainly andro, which was kind of controversial at the time, creatine, those types of over-the-counter things you could buy at GNC. You could argue that they were certainly within their ability to take things like that.
The other thing, Frank, that reminded me about last night was one of the things, and they didn't really get into this as much. That's why I said they should have made it a two-part 30 for 30, in my opinion. One of the reasons why McGuire, the expectations were on him and Griffey, is because the year before, McGuire did hit, what was it, 58 home runs.
58, yeah.
Griffey hit 56 back-to-back years, 97, 98. So part of the anticipation wasn't just some random thing. It was legitimately this guy got so close the year before. That's what rolled in the anticipation, and it felt like baseball, part of the reason why there was the eyes focused on it was because there was a little bit of background. I think they kind of didn't really touch on the background at all.
Yeah, exactly. If you remember 1997, and this is documented in the 30 for 30, Mark McGuire is traded from the Oakland Athletics to the St. Louis Cardinals. Cardinals ended up not making the playoffs, but really kind of there was a certain excitement that McGuire brought to the St. Louis Cardinals on the way to hitting 58. And the thought was, and I remember thinking this as a fan, that he's kind of primed. If he could put it all together next year, he can beat this record. And of course, Sammy Sosa came out of nowhere to also take part. But yeah, Ken Griffey Jr. He was certainly the best player I've ever seen in my lifetime, and I got to watch him from the time I was probably 8 years old on until he retired. So definitely somebody that we thought would do it, but he was sort of that consistent model of consistency for so many years, and he has never once been mentioned under steroids, which is something that kind of wasn't really addressed. People thought Griffey would be, if anybody could do it, it'd be Griffey, but the general perception is that he stayed off of the steroids and those types of things that help people recover, their bodies recover, and kind of for being clean, Griffey sort of kind of got left out of all this.
And by the way, there was a Philly named Ryan Howard who hit 58 home runs one year. So
yeah, absolutely. In fact, at the time, if you remember, people were saying, "All right, well, Ryan Howard is chasing the clean record."
Right. Which who really knows who's clean or not anyway? I mean, the whole thing is a farce. But Frank, I appreciate you jumping on today. I know it's a lot of different things. We pulled you in different directions, but it just feels like baseball and then the 30 for 30 last night, just kind of drug up a lot of different thoughts. And I appreciate you jumping on the Boardwalk kind of hotline today.
I'm hoping next time we talk, we have a plan in place for baseball.
Well, the next time we hear from you is tomorrow on the Sports Bash at 3:00. So there might be some news by tomorrow. So stay tuned, right?
I think we'll hear something today in one way or another, I would imagine.
Frank, appreciate the time again.
Thanks, Josh.
Josh Hennig here on the warm-up 97.3 ESPN. Back to the texts coming up next here on 97.3 ESPN 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation on 97.3 ESPN and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app presented by First Bank of Sea Isle City. Welcome back into the warm-up. We got a bunch of texts to get to at 609-403-0973. Thanks again to Frank Klose for jumping on because it just feels like the stuff with baseball is getting so out of hand. Like I said, I'm glad I'm not in Major League Baseball right now because this drama is just excessive. There's drama all the time. Nuts. But back to the text board, 609-403-0973. Terry from Northfield chimes in and says, Josh never hit a real home run, weak non-athlete. And he throws in a couple laughing emojis. Hey, listen, Terry, I'll tell you what I'm good and what I'm not good at. I've applied my hand over the years to almost every team sport. I've played soccer, I played football, I played basketball, played baseball, and by far, hitting a baseball is the one thing I just never consistently could do. In fact, I was actually a better hitter when I was a kid than when I got older, but then my depth perception started going more wonky, and seeing the ball coming at me was always a problem, but throwing the ball was a lot easier, and, I can't really catch a football grade either. That's why I always played defense when I played football. But I don't know if calling me a weak athlete is probably not the best move, but let me put it this way. If you asked me to do anything else in sports in my prime, I probably would be able to do it at a decent quality level. Hitting a baseball, that was more like a flip a coin, hope for the best kind of scenario. Dan from EHT chimes in 609-403-0973. He says, This is an extremely unusual time. There is no comparison to any other time in our history. The pandemic might have something to do with everything that is going on. Friends I know have been taking certain muscle enhancements, though, are different animals. Their confidence is through the roof. It's like saying you can run through a wall. It's mental as much as it is physical. Dan talking about the PED era. The problem that I have with the era of baseball is that McGwire would have hit 50 and not 70 home runs. Well, here's the thing, Dan. First of all, I can't agree with that 100% because the science behind performance enhancers is very subjective because you can find a study that supports both sides of the argument. Yes, there are studies that show that, like McGwire said, I take these enhancers to help me recover. And that was usually the science behind things like HGH and creatine, for example. But muscle enhancements are not all one and the same. Using a testosterone booster is not the same as amino acids. Amino acids are not the same as methamphetamines, and methamphetamines are not the same as mental focus drugs. They're all enhancers. So it's hard to really say, Dan, which does what. There's no science that says that if McGwire never took Andro, he couldn't have hit 70 home runs. But there's also no science that says that without the drugs, McGwire was or wasn't anything. Now, McGwire even admits today that probably he'd be in different health and different shape if he didn't take those drugs. And part of the problem with taking those drugs is that it's an inexact science. But I'm not going to sit here and act like the performance enhancers didn't help his success. But to sit here and say that 100% the drugs did help him, I just can't buy into that. And that's why I do appreciate Ryan from the Villas chiming in, but I can't fully agree with him. He says, you are insane if you believe steroids did not help him hit home runs. You are insane also to believe they're only using the things that got caught using. Your body doesn't change like that off of creatine and android. Steroids don't only make you bigger, fast, stronger. They improve everything in recovery, hand, time, coordination, etc. And let's say your argument is that it does improve the hand-eye coordination. How many home runs would have been doubles or flyouts? Well, here's the thing, and I appreciate you chiming in, Ryan, from the Villas. First of all, the problem with your putting it out there is that you're assuming that you know everything they did or didn't take. I don't think you can be a great baseball player if you can't hit a baseball. You don't get to the major leagues and hit home runs just because you took PEDs. I will never believe that. I can't agree with you on that. Do I believe that, the enhancement helped them? Yes. But listen, there are a lot of people who can build muscle and put on athletic achievements without taking PEDs. I can't sit here and say that PEDs were the only reason. And listen, you can disagree with me, Ryan from the Villas. We can talk more about it tomorrow if you want to text in. We can talk more about it tomorrow. But I just can't believe that just because you take a steroid means you're great. Jason Grimsley is one of the guys who got popped. Jason Grimsley was a mediocre pitcher in his career. Did Jason Grimsley throw a fastball harder? Maybe, but it didn't make him a more, great Hall of Fame pitcher. He just wasn't.